In spite of TimeSplitters' success, developer Free Radical Design faced several challenges when creating a sequel. The original's design was charming but simplistic, and so the series' core concept needed to be expanded upon in a meaningful way. They also had less than 2 years to figure out how to do so, and in the meantime, the bar had been raised significantly. For an FPS released in 2000, TimeSplitters, while basic, nevertheless compared favourably to its peers. As an FPS competing in 2001 in a post-Halo Combat Evolved world, it didn't cut the mustard. It was a solid maiden outing by the studio, which proved consoles could compete with PC, but Bungie's masterpiece was so far beyond everything else that TimeSplitters quickly began to feel dated. Those at Free Radical, who had once helped revolutionise console shooters with Nintendo 64, smash hits GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, could only watch from the sidelines as Bungie's magnificent Halo and its raft of innovations blew all competition away. Unfortunately, TimeSplitters was very quickly forgotten about, leaving Free Radical with their work cut out if they were to match up to Microsoft's marquee franchise. Not only did they have to deliver a sequel of increased complexity in record time, they also had the unenviable task of trying not to fall into the category of, it's good, but it's no Halo. During this video, I'm going to see how they fared, examining TimeSplitters 2's campaign level by level from beginning to end, sharing my thoughts as I go. So let's not waste any more time and get cracking. The best place to start is with TimeSplitters 2's opening cutscene, which is in itself an immediate improvement over its predecessor. The original does not have a story. It features a collection of characters you play as in varied settings, but there is no narrative cohesion. During each of its missions, you choose between 2 members of the TimeSplitters cast, then enter an area, run to its end, grab whatever object you need and escape, while being chased by time-travelling aliens. Details be damned. TimeSplitters 2 rectifies this issue from its outset, introducing a story with a simple premise which provides immediate justification for your actions.
We fought long and hard, but now we are lost, for they have taken their evil war into our past. Traveling through time, they have sown corruption, unraveling the fabric of our history. Our last chance is to strike back, seize the time crystals, and turn their twisted weapon against them. The fight for survival has begun.
Space Marines Sergeant Cortez and Corporal Hart secure a time portal on a space station which is under attack by the TimeSplitters. Stealing 9 crystals, the nefarious aliens use the portal to escape, with Cortez giving chase. He then travels to 9 times and places, jumping into the shoes of different people each time he does, to retrieve the crystals, hopefully before any lasting damage is done. This side of events won't come up again until towards the campaign's conclusion, so for the time being, we're going to leave it on ice. Your quest begins proper with TimeSplitters 2's most famous mission, Siberia. It and every level which follows are introduced with a text briefing providing context, another storytelling device absent from the original. On this occasion, you are investigating biological weaponry research being undertaken in 1990 at the Oblast Dam, likely using the 10,000-year-old organic specimens discovered there. Bizarrely, lots of very important information can also only be found via the character gallery hidden deep in the game's menus, such as the name of the character you play as, Ilsa Nadir. Incidentally, you also learn there that Ilsa is the daughter of Dr. Katya Nadir from TimeSplitters campaign, one of 2 characters you can play as during Village. So I don't have to keep jumping back to the gallery. From here on out, information from it will be woven in subtly where appropriate to add colour. Speaking of adding colour, each time period and place is introduced with its own cutscene.
Nikolai, the light! Stupid torch does nothing in this army work.
And these brilliant cinematics make the world of difference when it comes to immersion. You're then treated to shots of the dam before the camera swings behind Ilsa as you take control. Where have we seen that exact shot before? Ah yes, at the start of GoldenEye's first mission. You'll never guess where it's set too. That's right, at a dam. Putting to one side the very light horror stylings you were just privy to, Siberia is a James Bond thriller in all but name. Many of Free Radical's team had previously worked on GoldenEye and Perfect Dark while at Rare, and traces of both games' DNA can be seen everywhere in TimeSplitters 2. This aspect of the campaign will be of particular focus while chatting about Siberia, as it's here where the majority of comparisons are most easily drawn. You begin equipped with a silent sniper rifle and pistol, and are straight away given free rein to silently dispatch patrolling guards and destroy cameras across a snow-covered dam, a sublime mix of GoldenEye's own dam and later stealth-focused outing surface. Along with your weapons, you're also equipped with an additional tool Bond never had access to, in the form of the temporal uplink. It provides a mini-map and a view of guard and camera sightlines to help you better remain undetected. If you take your time, plan your approach, and use everything at your disposal, you can complete much of Siberia stealthily without ever alerting enemies to your presence. You don't have to be quiet though. You can go in guns blazing from the outset, blasting with abandon and triggering every alarm, an ill-advised strategy which is nonetheless still viable, and you'll never be punished beyond perhaps a temporary increase in difficulty. Or there's the middle ground in between being a ghost and a bull in a china shop, where you sneak around only until you're detected, at which point you turn up the heat. An entire spectrum of playstyles are catered for, where in TimeSplitters only rushing to the end or being overly cautious would yield guaranteed success, and it makes the sequel a far more palatable experience. TimeSplitters 2 also takes its cues from GoldenEye and Perfect Dark rather than its predecessor in terms of mission structure. Gone are the days of barging through a set of hallways, grabbing an item and fleeing, replaced with multiple objectives which change depending on difficulty, a design philosophy in keeping with that found in Rare's earlier titles. On easy and normal difficulties, normal being the choice for my playthrough, you usually have primary objectives which must be accomplished, and secondary objectives you can skip if you wish. An early must complete in the first area is deactivating a communications dish using timed mines, whereas burning evidence in filing cabinets found throughout the dam is optional. The biggest difference is that most levels on easy are abbreviated, with Siberia drawing to a close once you destroy a biohazard container containing a time splitter hidden deep within the facility's basement.
Portal has been stabilized.
On normal and hard, that's only halfway, with hard making secondary objectives like burning the evidence mandatory too. This blueprint is adhered to across the entire campaign. Easy is shorter, normal adds length and with it extra primary and secondary objectives, and hard makes the secondary objectives compulsory. As an aside, third game in the franchise TimeSplitters Future Perfect does away with this concept, with Free Radical preferring a more conventional approach to difficulty, with enemies having more health, doing more damage and the like, but objectives remaining the same across the board. Which you like best will be down to personal preference. Returning to 2's campaign is a more appealing prospect as things actually change, but it actively punishes those who want or need an easier ride with gated content. Future Perfect structure ensures everyone has broadly the same experience regardless of talent, but it lacks the difficulty changes and thus is less replayable. Before reaching the aforementioned basement, there's a lot of ground to cover, with you needing to sneak inside the dam and cross over to the other side first. While that's happening, let's get GoldenEye out of the way entirely by talking about how TimeSplitters 2 matches it in the little details. In TimeSplitters, your health and armor meters sit in the top left and are functional, if unexciting. In TimeSplitters 2, they light up like a Christmas tree on either side of the screen whenever you take damage. To say they're similar to GoldenEye's would be a gigantic understatement. They're practically identical. The mechanics behind the meters better match in 2 as well. TimeSplitters levels had health packs and armour lying around for you to find, whereas TimeSplitters 2 and GoldenEye only feature armour. If you take damage without wearing any, you cannot regain health later, which means it needs to be very carefully managed. Sprinting to a time portal with no armour and only a sliver of health remaining becomes a wonderfully tense experience as a result. When you're in the midst of racing to the exit, surrounded by scores of gangsters, robots, or assorted monsters while trying to manage your health and armour at the same time, you might also want to pause for a second to catch your breath. You'll then notice that even the game's pause menu owes much to GoldenEye, with it looking strikingly similar to that displayed on James Bond's watch. What's more, there are even subtler references to catch still, such as the hidden games found in certain levels resembling Nintendo 64 cartridges. You can play each and every one of them too. Free Radical takes some of the best bits of their earlier works and makes them sing as part of a new series, and they're a large part of why TimeSplitters 2 is such a massive step up from its predecessor. Inside the most spacious segment of the dam, you shoot some soldiers and machine gun sentries, and possibly a few melons if you're feeling mischievous, as you edge ever closer to a cavernous area not in keeping with the facility's stark, man-made aesthetic. Entering the second room attached to it and turning the security system on an unsuspecting guard, you may then get a bit of a fright.
Lockdown initiated.
During my TimeSplitters retrospective, hit the card on screen now to check that out, I spoke about the game's gotcha moments, such as enemies spawning in unexpected places to ruin your day. They are infuriating. In 2, Free Radical still enjoys toying with you, but as you'll see throughout this video, the tricks they play, like this one, are generally nowhere near as deeply unfair as they once were. Zombies cleared, you head back out, destroy the biohazard container and grab the nearby time crystal, note the fate of the two poor chaps seen during Siberia's intro, and then use the keycard you just collected to restart the facility's power. There's good news and there's bad news. The bad news is that it's released hordes of zombies as well as mutants, soldiers who underwent genetic mutation due to the TimeSplitters' evil aura and were then experimented on by scientists trying to turn them into super soldiers. You now no longer have to worry solely about the guards, but about the monsters out for blood, and the guards as chaos erupts across the site. A tonal shift away from the straight-laced spy thriller prior, it's a clear statement of intent from Free Radical. If Siberia's first half is designed to show off how much the studio has advanced the TimeSplitters concept using learnings from their previous work, then this second serves to quell any worries that the series has suddenly become too serious. It's a confidently executed merger of old and new, GoldenEye and Perfect Dark structure combining superbly with TimeSplitters' eccentricity. To escape the marauding horrors unleashed, you have to get to the top of the dam, but there may be a couple of loose ends you need to tie up first. Dispatching the 4 mutants on the prowl shouldn't be an issue, as they appear along the path you'll be taking anyway. The filing cabinets containing evidence, on the other hand, well, if you've not been paying attention, then there's a chance, albeit a slim one, that you'll need to backtrack to the start. That won't matter though, due to how fantastic Siberia's level design is. You start outside on one side of the dam, then make your way inside, passing a broken elevator, climb some stairs and cross over to the other side through a tunnel. Then you go back down an identical set of stairs with their own non-working elevator attached, go out into the snow on the other side and enter the research area. Having explored almost every inch of the facility, turning on the power then gets both elevators up and running so that you can tick any final tasks off your list with relative ease. The two-side symmetry and how travel is eventually streamlined really helps with pacing, and it lends a sense of environmental consistency to proceedings, with you being able to visit every part of the dam you can see when the mission begins. That includes its top, which you can only access via the elevators. A helicopter gunship awaits, as does a turret you can use to take it down. Pairs of guards also arrive at regular intervals, but they are but a minor inconvenience thanks to your greatly increased firepower. TimeSplitters 2 features several boss fights, and this first one, while still basic, is one of the more interesting examples. It's been said that Siberia alone was responsible for a disproportionate amount of Free Radical's development time, and considering this encounter, the level design and the freedom it affords you, and given its immense quality, that's not surprising. There are plenty of excellent adventures to come too, but this is the campaign shining brightest. It is not just the best mission in the franchise, it's one of my all-time favourites within the genre, and to keep this calibre of work up for an entire game would have been a monumental task. When the helicopter has been reduced to smouldering wreckage, you're able to leave, and thus ends Siberia. Next, we travel back to Chicago and 1932, where a mob boss named Big Tony has laid his hands on some gemstones, one of them a time crystal perhaps. Playing as former cop turned detective Jake Fenton, you need to meet a man named Marco the Snitch, who will help you access the Sunrise Club Tony is hiding out in so you can finally bring him to justice. That is, of course, unless Tony's muscle manages to stop you first.
Races! Come on, you stupid! I want that son of a... I want him dead, you hear me? Dead!
Dead. Yeah, we'll see about that. But from now on, Big, you better watch the shadows, because I'm taking you down.
Chicago opens in the same vein as Siberia before it, with you given the choice between going in loud and proud or taking a quieter approach. It was at this point in the campaign, as I desperately tried to aim at unsuspecting mobsters' heads, that my patience with the game's aiming mechanics began to seriously wane. I cannot believe they were carried over from the original. Whenever you hold down the button to target enemies more precisely in TimeSplitters, a reticle appears and you then use the right stick to aim. However, as soon as you stop pushing the stick in whatever direction, the crosshair will try to recenter itself, meaning you have to constantly fight against it while doing your best to remain precise. Apologies for mentioning GoldenEye for the millionth time, but it's a design quirk one can only assume Free Radical brought over from Rare. It was an excruciating necessity for James Bond's FPS debut in 1997. The Nintendo 64 only had one analog stick, and it meant during my recent TimeSplitters playthrough, I mostly just looked in the general direction of anyone shooting at me and fired, relying on the incredibly strong bullet magnetism to get things done. TimeSplitters 2 is exactly the same, and it's very disappointing. The original could be forgiven. After all, at that time, developers were still figuring out the best controls for console shooters, yet to still be using what was, by the time 2 released, an antiquated system is a letdown. Halo Combat Evolved had set the benchmark for how a console FPS should handle a year prior, and yet, for whatever reason, Free Radical were seemingly resistant to change. It was less of an annoyance in the first game, as stealth wasn't usually an option, but in a sequel where it's actively encouraged, how hard it is to aim becomes a real hindrance. Thankfully, it's an issue Free Radical did eventually rectify. Future Perfect, among other updates to its controls, gives you a permanent crosshair and precise aiming, with the crosshair remaining wherever you place it. It is a vast improvement. Reaching the city streets, a phone rings. It's Marco, and he's close by.
Hey there, it's Marco. Meet me at the newsstand down the main street.
Before you can get to him, you need to deal with a gangster lurking in the vicinity, and then Tony's brother, who attempts to make a speedy getaway while nearly running you over in the process. I actually failed this objective the first time, which was fine as on normal it's optional, but worried about missing something I restarted and tried again. My initial instinct was to get frustrated at the lack of warning and it being unclear whether you needed to shoot the driver specifically or just the car, but honestly, in retrospect, it's very forgiving. As long as you don't wait an age to start shooting, you should be absolutely fine. Your other optional objective, although remember they are not optional on hard, is to drain 4 whiskey barrels, and you'll come across the third of them once Tony's brother has been dealt with. Ordinarily, I hate having to hunt in games for a certain number of whatever object, like the filing cabinets during Siberia or the barrels here, and in TimeSplitters 2 you have to do it a good number of times. Thankfully, they're more tolerable than in many other games, thanks to them always being scattered in obvious places along reasonably linear paths. You'd have to be making a concerted effort not to notice the vast majority of them, and they'll usually be ticked off your list naturally as you progress, rather than you having to hunt for them. As promised, Marco awaits behind the newsstand, and he needs you to take care of some business before he'll help you.
Looks like there's trouble brewing in O'Leary's. You better check it out before we go anywhere.
Chicago's middle section is uninteresting in gameplay terms. First, you head into O'Leary's bar, where trouble is brewing. Lots of mobsters appear and harass you, and you need to get rid of them without shooting any patrons, also a secondary objective, which isn't too difficult as they have quite chunky health bars. Next, you have to protect Marco himself while he returns to his hideout as even more gangsters arrive on the scene. Marco walks painfully slowly, and this portion of Chicago felt like it took an age, but having timed it after, it lasted less than a minute. Finally, you fight to the top floor of an adjacent building where Big Tony keeps his safe. You blow it open using dynamite and collect the keycard inside, which grants you access to the Sunrise Club. But before you can make your way there, there's one last encounter to get through, with aggressors waiting for you in the street and watching from nearby windows. As mentioned, it's not gameplay which will get your pulse pounding, nor is it particularly challenging, but I never found myself bored. Chicago's backing track might just be the best in the game, composer Graham Norgate outdoing his already stellar work on TimeSplitters, and the hard-boiled detective film noir gangster vibe maintained throughout is a compelling one. Free Radical also gives you just enough freedom that the mission feels less linear than it actually is. In reality, all the city consists of is one street which winds round to the club where the level culminates, plus the bar and apartment buildings you explore prior. It's big enough that it feels lived in, while not so big that you'll ever get lost. And you can even play pool or shoot bottles if you want, small interactions which add an extra layer of believability that wasn't present in any of the originals levels. Judging Chicago purely by its gameplay, it is very middle of the road much of the time. Add to it the intangibles just discussed, and it becomes something much more memorable. Now that you have the keycard, at long last it's time to pay Big Tony a visit. A few enemies will try to stop you, but they're not as impassable an obstacle as the gate keeping you out is. Thankfully, the solution is just a phone call away.
Of course we'll send you a taxi, sir.
Using the brief window afforded by the taxi to slip inside, you pop a cap in the ass of some henchmen and arrive at the Sunrise Club, where, surprise surprise, more enemies are waiting. There is another boss fight too, in the form of Big Tony himself. If you were expecting something on par with shooting at an attack helicopter using a turret on top of a dam, like you did during Siberia, you're going to be underwhelmed. As Fenton and the mob boss go face to face, poor old Tony finds himself positively outgunned, lasting barely 20 seconds before he pops his clogs. You will encounter more bosses like this one during the campaign, people with guns who die very quickly, and they're all fairly anticlimactic. With the coast clear, you can grab the time crystal in the same room, at which point one or two timesplitters teleport in to try and thwart you, and once they've been dispatched, a time portal opens up so that you can escape. TimeSplitters 2's third escapade unfolds in Paris's Notre Dame Cathedral in 1895. The evil Jacques Delamorte has been driven mad by visions of angels, and now leads a cult who have been kidnapping young women and could be attempting to summon demons too. Playing as an aristocrat disguised as a troubadour, Viola, it's down to you to put an end to their horrifying deeds.
You a believer, a pretty girl. The angels will come, and you will see your destiny. So pure, so innocent.
After Siberia and Chicago both provided an unprecedented degree of freedom compared to anything featured in the original, Notre Dame is straightforward and a nice change of pace. Those first two were still quite constricted, but they did a good job of creating the illusion of scale, whereas the route you take through the cathedral offers no such thing. You never really deviate from the path which spans the whole level, and the objectives you need to complete are laid out obviously along it. It's not unreasonable to say that this is where Free Radical starts to increase the wackiness factor somewhat. Zombies are the most common threat, and there are a lot of them to deal with. I'd imagine some of you out there are shuddering at the thought after TimeSplitters Mansion, an extraordinarily unfair beast of a mission. But rest assured, Notre Dame is nowhere near as tiresome. That's because TimeSplitters 2's gameplay has been slowed down significantly. In the original, everything moves incredibly fast, and while that suits the game's arcade stylings, it means there are occasions when it feels like greater value is placed on memorization than it is on skill and reaction time. Success often comes in the wake of repeated, unavoidable deaths which teach you where enemies will be during your next run, as opposed to from you charging in head first first and adapting to whatever situation you find yourself in. These issues were especially prevalent during Mansion, due to its length and the fact you had to shoot zombies' heads off to kill them using the janky aiming system, which made the episode insufferable. In the sequel, not only here but across the entire campaign, the reduction in speed leads to gameplay feeling more measured and less rushed, and I particularly appreciated that when battling the undead. It's also something of a prerequisite because you need that thinking time to adapt to whatever your objectives might be. With TimeSplitters Future Perfect later putting the brakes on even more, personally, I'd go so far as to say that 2 is the perfect middle ground between a predecessor which is too fast and a successor which is a tad too slow. Navigating your way out of Notre Dame's sewers, you have a task to complete, saving 4 tied-up maidens. The solution is an elementary one: walk over to them and free them while making sure the monsters who appear can't get close. However, there is a clever twist. One of them is a changeling who immediately attacks you, and with you only rescuing 3 so far, that means 1 is still unaccounted for. Only moments later, you find her. In the cathedral's main hall waits a group of cultists you need to dispatch. On the altar sits the time crystal, and suspended from the ceiling is the 4th and final maiden. Don't make the mistake I did and shoot the rope to get her down. I feel very stupid showing you this footage as she's clearly hanging from far too great a height to be freed in that manner. The correct course of action is to head upstairs and pull one of these 2 ropes, which causes her to be lowered safely to the ground. The Hunchback of Notre Dame then arrives on the scene, and together you have to hold out while waves of ghouls spawn in. It's all wonderfully unhinged and fits the hammer horror tone Free Radical was going for like a glove.
Thank you very much. Come on, my dear, let's go.
That's also true of the boss fight with the Portal Demon. After the second-rate face-off with Big Tony at the end of Chicago, it's a welcome return to form. The demon is gigantic and therefore an easy target, but you also have to deal with zombies who continually spawn in. Together, they create a nice contrast between the less precise shots needed to hit the big guy and the accuracy required to keep the undead away. You'll need to be on your toes and avoid being too stationary, lest you get surrounded or hit by the towering boss's projectiles, which shouldn't be overly taxing thanks to the second floor's spacious balconies. Why a lone maiden was hanging in the middle of the room earlier also now makes sense. Presumably, she was a sacrifice for the demon. With the demon dead, all that's left for you to do is fight through the last of Jacques Delamorte's devotees and some TimeSplitters in the pouring rain and confront the man himself. By the time I reached Notre Dame's midpoint, I was getting bored of battling monsters, so hats off to Free Radical for really upping the intensity for the duration of its second half. To me, it's exactly how you want a linear FPS level to be paced. A leisurely start in the basement transitions to an action-packed middle with the Hunchback, before events conclude with a bang with back-to-back bosses. It's unfortunate that second boss is Jacques, who, like Big Tony Pryor, is easily dealt with. He does at least give us some insight before the end into who the angels he's been seeing are. They were TimeSplitters. With the preceding 3 outings set in the near present, the past, and then the past again, at long last it's time to travel to the future for Return to Planet X. In 2280, alien races the Ozor and Mizor Mox are at war for control of the aforementioned planet, with pilot Hank Nova sent in to investigate a base used for spaceship construction. His arrival is a bumpy one. Return to Planet X, as the name suggests, could be your second visit to the alien world in question, having potentially first got to grips with it during TimeSplitters' mission Planet X. It perhaps won't be much of a shock then to hear that it's something of a regression after a trio of tight, well-executed adventures. Matching the uncomplicated gameplay of the original, the path through your rocky surroundings is the strictest thus far, with no lateral thinking required whatsoever. To put it bluntly, it's a throwback to simpler times, an opportunity to switch your brain off and blast things without really having to think. That isn't necessarily a bad thing though. When it comes to how the campaign as a whole is paced, Return to Planet X is well situated. Siberia and Chicago are relatively sedate, thoughtful affairs. Notre Dame then requires faster thinking and quicker reflexes before your trip to space goes all out with its action. Then, as we'll get to shortly, NeoTokyo winds everything down a notch or three, acting as a palate cleanser following 4 levels which gradually increase in excitement. That being said, even with this justification, I'd prefer it if there was a little more imagination. You might be fooled initially into thinking there is more on display than there actually is thanks to the weaponry on offer. The semi-automatic sci-fi handgun is unlike anything you've been equipped with yet, its bullets ricocheting all over the place, and the plasma auto rifle with its secondary sticky grenades returns having already featured in the original. They're a breath of fresh air. As you'll have probably noticed by now, the weapon sets available during each episode have been broadly the same despite them looking varied at first glance thanks to their differing aesthetics. At minimum, you're usually armed with a pistol, a shotgun, a rifle and some kind of explosive, with a few special armaments mixed in, like the flamethrower found during Siberia. The sci-fi handgun and the plasma auto rifle fill similar niches. They are a pistol and assault rifle with cooler names, but they're different enough that it will take you a while to notice. What you will definitely notice right away is how troublesome switching between them is. There is no weapon wheel you can use to select your guns, nor is there any visual indicator of which weapon you'll suddenly be equipped with when you press left and right on the D-pad to cycle through them. Because of how clunky it is, you should prepare for a panic at inopportune moments as you desperately try to get out the right gun. Free Radical does rectify this in Future Perfect at least, with your weapon lineup displayed at the top of the screen as you make a change. It's not the most graceful solution, but it's about as good as you can hope for considering the limited number of inputs on a controller. It's not just the guns you have on your person you need to worry about either. Since the end of Siberia, TimeSplitters 2 has been turret free, but here they return with a vengeance. The first is close to Return to Planet X's start, and it is very boring. Aliens spawn in for roughly a minute and a half, and you sit around dividing your time between fending them off and waiting for them to appear. It goes completely against the rest of the mission's identity, it being a return to the TimeSplitters gameplay of old, and it slows things down way too much. The corridor shooter feel of everything outside the turret sections and the amazing soundtrack are designed to encourage you to move at pace, but for whatever reason, Free Radical slows proceedings to a crawl multiple times, and it doesn't work. On top of this dodgy in-mission pacing, you also have to deal with space flies. Swarm enemies appear several times during the campaign, starting with Return to Planet X, then Aztec, and finally Space Station, and I detest all of them with every fibre of my being. If you are developing an FPS which doesn't give you a crosshair by default and features terrible old-fashioned aiming mechanics, do not put small, tough-to-target enemies in your game. It doesn't work here, it doesn't work after, at no point does it come close to working, despite Free Radical having 3 stabs at it. Beyond that already discussed, there's not much else to write home about. Once past the space flies, you're stopped again outside a spaceship while enemies spawn in, which isn't too dissimilar from what you had to do a minute or two ago, and you then jump down a hole in the craft to progress. There is a multi-faction firefight in an open area, which some may find thrilling, but compared to moments like those included in Halo Combat Evolved a year earlier, it's hard to be impressed. That's not just my opinion in the present either. I remember distinctly feeling the same way back in 2002 as well. There's little else of note. Another turret section awaits, on this occasion against UFOs, then you enter the base and grab the time crystal and make a dash for the exit as TimeSplitters spawn in to stop you. As mentioned, Return to Planet X is by no means the worst TimeSplitters 2 has to offer, and it's actually good fun when you're left to your own devices to run around firing laser guns, but the constant stop-start design weighs the experience down. I never mind playing it, but I'm hardly looking forward to it either, especially with there being no NPCs, unique events or interesting storytelling, which would all help alleviate the mediocrity. I often find that a drop in quality during a video game is symptomatic of what's to come, and while that is sort of the case with TimeSplitters 2, its decline in quality doesn't happen quite yet. In actuality, 2019's NeoTokyo and the story of Ghost, a man framed of breaking into government research labs by Sadako and her hacker gang, is tremendous. That includes this cinematic which sets the scene. Trailing one of the hackers, who by the by is invisible on hard difficulty, through NeoTokyo's gorgeous neon-lined streets in the pouring rain is probably the most atmospheric part of TimeSplitters 2's campaign. It is a beautifully realised Blade Runner-inspired environment, which more than any other feels real, with civilians wandering around and trains and vehicles passing overhead. Traversing this striking location can also be a great source of exasperation to boot, as avoiding being spotted by your target, the flying police cars, or the many cameras littering the area is a taxing task if you're unaware of the key to success. Earlier, I spoke about how the game's wonky aiming mechanics are the result of Free Radical failing, or refusing, to modernise. How difficult this segment has the potential to be is the direct result of that stubbornness too, in a different way. All you need to do to progress without issue is look at your temporal uplink. On it, the police are big red blobs you need to avoid, and every camera's line of sight is displayed. It makes things easy. Except, you'll probably have forgotten about it by this stage, as it's barely ever needed, and so it being the solution to the problem you're facing likely won't be immediately obvious. Free Radical wants you to be sneaky at times. Look at much of Siberia, look at Chicago's early sections, look at how the temporal uplinks minimap is nigh on identical to that popularised by tactical espionage masterpiece Metal Gear Solid. In that game, you need only look to the top right of the screen to see an area's layout, the position of any guards and cameras, and which direction they're facing. The problem is that in TimeSplitters 2, that most crucial aspect of it is missing. It's not on the screen. Now granted, I can see the rationale for it being an item you have to actively select. The argument would be that the temporal uplink isn't always useful, and it shouldn't therefore take up valuable screen space. Okay, but then if you're going to effectively neuter the minimap's functionality, you need to compensate by making it extremely apparent when it will be an effective tool. In fairness, you do begin NeoTokyo weaponless and can only select the uplink if you wish, which you'd think would be enough. However, with how many complaints I've seen over the years about how tricky this opening is, I think more should have been done to put you on the right track. Maybe a visual or audio prompt reminding you that the temporal uplink is tailor-made for these situations. After slipping through the streets with ease, or bumbling through them as the case may be, you reach the sewers leading to the gang's headquarters and use the security cameras to find the password for entry. You also get your hands on a gun courtesy of an unsuspecting gang member. Although you can also steal weaponry from one of the city's shops earlier, as long as you do it quietly. Inside the base are more gang members, although they won't pose much of a problem, after which you need to pick up a digital camera and photograph both the timesplitter containing machine as well as blueprints for the contraption. Just point and click and then upload the evidence to the local police server, and the job's a good 'un. It does raise the alarm though, so you'll need to keep your wits about you. Thankfully, the only objective which remains is to turn off the machine. All you have to do is pull a lever next to it to do so, and I am ashamed to say that I didn't spot it at first, even with power written quite obviously below it. There are several more encounters with the gang as you journey back to NeoTokyo's streets where the time crystal awaits, as does Sadako, who you have to eliminate. She is kind of a boss like the other human bosses, except she doesn't have a health bar, and she didn't even manage to get a single shot off when I finally met her, which was somewhat anticlimactic. It would have been nice to have spent additional time in this outdoor area, honestly. Not only is it my personal favourite of all of TimeSplitters 2's varied environments, it also feels tailor-made for more exploratory gameplay with its amazing atmosphere and multiple side paths. I'd have been happy spending another 10 minutes working through extra objectives here, what with it being such a striking space. If you search it thoroughly, you might come across this lovely chap.
Do not be blinded by anger.
But there's little else to find. It's a big reason why I'd love to see a TimeSplitters title like 2 made nowadays. Imagine a location like NeoTokyo but with the interactivity increased tenfold, with there being more people to chat to and an array of secrets to find. The format of the campaign's more open levels especially is so strong, but unfortunately we never get to see it realised to its fullest potential, with Free Radical later opting to create more linear missions for Future Perfect. Given the series' current state, it's very unlikely we'll ever see it, but I hold out hope that one day the TimeSplitters franchise or another will build on the zany, time-hopping, quantum leap-like concept. From the cyberpunk East, we transition to the Wild West and the year 1853. A Confederate deserter known as the Colonel has returned from South America with some frightening new allies in tow, I wonder who they are, and is now terrorising the town of Little Prospect, going so far as to frame and imprison local law lady Ramona Souza. Slave-turned-bounty hunter Elijah Jones heads into town searching for the wanted man, who was last seen in a nearby mine digging for something unnatural.
Dead or alive.
As soon as Wild West starts, you are shot at, a bit of a cheap trick if you ask me, and there are only 3 enemies total who need to be dealt with before a period of calm while you figure out how to rescue Ramona. That makes this the perfect time for a whinge about how arduous the puzzles which appear during TimeSplitters 2's second half are. You might have found 1 or 2 objectives in other levels to be head-scratchers, but generally so far the methods for completing most of them have been obvious. Not so in Little Prospect. To break Ramona out, you need to grab the gunpowder stored in a chest in the jail, then go round the back where a cart full of TNT awaits. I figured out the first step straight away, which is to push the cart towards the jail. Then I tried shooting the TNT before remembering I had the gunpowder, so I poured that everywhere and then tried shooting that. No joy. The wagon has McFug written on it, but maybe it should read fugging annoying, as the actual solution is unintuitive to say the least. After going round in circles for a few minutes, luckily I had a revelation. The inconspicuous boxes lying nearby will explode when shot, igniting the gunpowder and blowing open a hole.
Go get the Colonel! He's at the mine!
This is not the worst obtuse puzzle in TimeSplitters 2, but it does signal a downward trend in the quality of their design, with some grievous examples appearing in later levels too. If the jailbreak teaser is a tad on the perplexing side, then the remainder of Wild West is the opposite, this middle portion especially. Its simplicity and linearity rivals Return to Planet X, but because of how absorbing the spaghetti western theme is compared to the drab, samey, alien world, it's by far the better of the two. Enemy placement is exactly what you'd expect from a western, with aggressors appearing on rooftops, shooting at you from windows and popping up further down the street. And again, Graham Norgate's accompanying soundtrack is exquisite. If my one complaint about NeoTokyo was that more freeform gameplay would have been appreciated, with Wild West it's that I would have loved more story. The imagination displayed across the 9 vignettes is jaw-dropping, given how many man-hours they would have each taken to produce, and while their 15 to 20 minute runtimes mean they never outstay their welcome, apart from one we'll get to soon, Robot Factory, it does mean storytelling post their introductions tends to be put on the back burner. TimeSplitters Future Perfect does a great job of rectifying this, with cinematics almost being too frequent at times, but in order to facilitate that shift, the series moves away from telling one-off tales about one-off characters, with Cortez instead being the star of the show. It cannot be denied that Future Perfect weaves a more intricate narrative, but I've always wondered how Free Radical might have taken levels like those in 2 and further expanded their stories in a sequel. While working your way down the main path, there is a fire in a barn and a woman trapped. It's no big deal, however. All you need to do is shoot the barrels of water above to rescue her.
It's getting awfully hot, hero!
Something that didn't click for me until here is how much of TimeSplitters 2's interactivity revolves around the use of liquids and fire, and it did make me chuckle. During Siberia, if you get set on fire by a mutant or a soldier, there's a working shower which can put you out, or you can grab a fire extinguisher and unload it while looking at the ground. There's the whiskey barrels in Chicago which empty at different rates depending on where you shoot them, and the Wild West example just mentioned. Later, in Atom Smasher, you also have to extinguish flames to open a blast door, and on Hard, some of these scientists needed to defuse the bombs are on fire and need the same treatment. Aztec also makes you burn wasps' nests, and there are probably loads of others I've missed or forgotten about as well. Reaching the town's outskirts and the mines, there's little left to do. In an open area awaits the Colonel himself, yet another boss fight against a human character which, to be kind, is trivial. With your arch enemy no more, all that's left to do is pull a lever to reroute a minecart full of dynamite which blows open a hole leading to the time crystal, so you can grab it and then leg it to a time portal while TimeSplitters make your life difficult. A follow-up to this video I'll likely make is a ranking of TimeSplitters 2's various adventures from worst to best, and Wild West will be one of the harder ones to place. If you value atmosphere, aesthetic and tone, this one is near the top of the pile. If you're more interested in gameplay, then it will definitely be further down the list, as you've seen everything it has to offer multiple times by this stage of the campaign, and with the only guns being a pistol, 2 pistols and a revolver, it's not exactly Christmas on that front. Either way, I'd guess there will be few who thoroughly dislike it as it has so much character, and sometimes that's enough to turn a mundane mission into something greater than the sum of its parts. A TimeSplitters alumni and one of the series' most recognisable characters takes centre stage in 1972 during Atom Smasher. Special Agent Harry Tipper, one of Chinese's 2 protagonists in the original and a major character in Future Perfect, has been sent to supervillain Kalos' secret lair, tasked with stopping the evil genius's experiments with an Atom Smasher. Kalos, who also appears again during Future Perfect, has left Tipper in a spot of bother as you enter the fray.
Wow! Not good. Whoa!
Hope you still got the guarantee, Kalos.
As Atom Smasher begins, you have to react quickly to avoid the malfunctioning laser beam, with the temporal uplink left on the ground in the next room for you to collect. The premise for this outing is easy to understand. There are 5 bombs rigged to blow, note the timer in the top right of the screen, and you need to disarm them, find the time crystal and escape. Oh, and you'll want to avoid killing any scientists you run into. It all sounds pretty painless, but in practice, it is a bit of a nightmare. I've plenty to say about it momentarily, as I want to focus on TimeSplitters 2's humour for just a tick. As discussed while looking at NeoTokyo and Wild West, I absolutely adore the conceit of Cortez stepping into different people's shoes in different times and places, both in story and gameplay terms. Even though many of the levels are fairly light on plot once their briefings and opening cutscenes are done, it's a unique way of framing each expedition, as opposed to Cortez being the lone protagonist throughout TimeSplitters Future Perfect. It's not just the framing that I love either, but also how the humour is handled. As I'm sure you're well aware by now, it's quirky and very funny at times, spoofing various film styles and genres such as B-movies, film noir, and spy thrillers and spy spoofs. The setup of the laser scenes at the start of Atom Smasher are very Goldfinger, a James Bond classic, while the light-hearted tone adds a splash of Austin Powers-esque humour. Importantly, the jokes are also really well balanced with some seriousness, and I rarely found myself groaning or rolling my eyes because a gag didn't land. By comparison, I played through Future Perfect recently after a couple of playthroughs of 2, and man alive did I struggle with some of the writing and humour. There is tons more story woven into the middle and end of missions, not just the beginning, which is great. Free Radical, however, leans into the double entendres, wisecracks and dirty jokes, and in my view, they went a bit too far.
You did it! Good show! Jolly good show! Are you okay, Precious? They didn't hurt you, did they? They made you do what? Like a monkey? Those bounders!
From scenes like that just shown to Jo Beth Casey, a young girl wearing a t-shirt with the word slut written on it in capital letters, it's all a bit too much and it cheapens the experience somewhat. Of course, we must remember that this sort of humour was very popular during the mid-noughties, and so while the bar has been raised in terms of writing quality in video games since, Future Perfect shouldn't be judged too harshly. Nonetheless, the difference in tone between playing as Harry Tipper in 2 and working alongside him in Future Perfect stood out to me, as do both games' narratives in general, with the former striking a better balance than the latter. What I appreciate most about TimeSplitters 2's campaign is that unlike TimeSplitters, where every level plays out mostly the same, Free Radical goes that extra mile and constantly provides varied, surprising scenarios. It's genuinely impressive, what with there being 10 of them too. With all the will in the world though, they were never all going to be outstanding, and Atom Smasher is one of the worst. It's the timer combined with a haphazardly placed checkpoint that gets you. Every mission has a single checkpoint somewhere, and generally they're put in the right place. Notre Dame's, for example, is slap bang in its middle after the frantic section where you rescue the majority of the maidens, as is NeoTokyo's with its checkpoint triggering after you enter the hacker's hideout. During Atom Smasher, you protect a scientist while he defuses the second bomb.
I'll take care of that bonfire.
With the checkpoint a short walk away near a set of stairs. This is only a third of the way into proceedings at best, with the really hard stuff still to come, which makes its placement bad enough. What makes it worse is that Atom Smasher heavily relies on TimeSplitters' gameplay style of old, that is, trial and error. Towards the start of this video, I mentioned that the original tends to reward memorization, as it's only through repetition and learning where enemies will be that some sections can be navigated with relative ease. That's also true here, with there being an outrageous number of henchmen who appear from all angles out to get you, and there's the added pressure of the timer, which only resets when a bomb has been dealt with. I would love to know what percentage of players finished Atom Smasher first time, as I'd put good money on it being low. Very low. Spend too long on encounters and you're in trouble, and with so many to get through, there's a good chance you'll find yourself back at the checkpoints multiple times, as you slowly learn not only where you're going to be shot from, but also what pace you need to keep to make it past wherever you died last. Providing some compensation, negotiating Kalos's lair is pain-free at least, with there being few, if any, distractions as you race your way through the base. There are these two side rooms opposite each other, one containing a valve you need to turn and the other this puzzle, if you can call it that, involving a bomb and a crane, an unnecessarily fiddly challenge when the pressure's already on. Doors which slowly open and lifts which move at a glacial pace are infuriating as well. Other than that, you mostly travel in a straight line, free radical one would assume, deliberately ensuring that the route you take is one thing you don't have to worry about. Once the bombs have been defused, you can finally de-clench, and you then have all the time in the world to rummage round the last area. The button which switches off a set of lasers blocking your progress can be found in a control room, with Kalos waiting on the other side.
Time crystal located.
You meddling fool! Stay away from those controls! Now, I expect you to die.
You also have to pull 4 switches to activate the reactor while TimeSplitters spawn and fire lightning at you, a pretty vicious final speed bump when taking into account how long ago the checkpoint was. Like Siberia, Atom Smasher is a GoldenEye or Perfect Dark level transplanted into a different game, and I wish Free Radical had done away with the timer and instead focused on giving you options. The supervillain, the aesthetic, both character-wise with the henchmen and in terms of the underground base itself, the circumstances, and even the music, they all foster a fantastic atmosphere. It's just a shame that you're usually in too much of a blooming hurry to appreciate them. Hot on the heels of Harry Tipper's return, we travel to 1920 and Aztec ruins to catch up with Captain Ash, the only character besides Tipper who appears in all 3 of the series' campaigns. Captain Ash is one of 2 characters you can play as during the franchise's first ever mission, Tomb, and he's also your companion as you storm a Scottish island in 1924 during Future Perfect's second chapter, Scotland the Brave. Here he wants to add a time crystal to his trophy cabinet, but it's going to be hard work, with golems, sentient simians and timesplitters worshipped as gods by the local tribe, all in his way.
Listen, Golem, you can't have it. The crystal's mine, you know. You devil, let go. Let me go.
TimeSplitters 2's back half is where most of its puzzling comes into play, and Aztec Ruins is what I would describe as the puzzle level, with some Indiana Jones sprinkled in for good measure. You are given a couple of warnings about what's to come immediately. Namely, that monkeys have horns which will alert enemies, and that there's nothing you can do quite yet to damage the dangerous wasps' nests. Nearly everything featured requires a modicum of thought on your part, sometimes arguably too much. The environment itself is a bit of a maze, although that's partly due to its narrowness and how samey its aesthetic is. You also have to think about how you deal with enemies. Tribesmen and monkeys, including those who throw explosive melons at you for some bizarre reason, are susceptible to all of your weapons, but wood golems and wasps' nests can only be destroyed with fire, so using torches to set your crossbow bolts alight is vital. It's all reasonably easy to figure out until you get to this absolute horror show of a puzzle involving 6 pillars. Now, it's not tough to complete when you understand what you need to do. Each pillar has 4 symbols on it, and you need to turn the pillars so that their symbols match whatever is displayed on the pillars opposite and next to them. That is not the issue though. The issue is that, as far as I can tell, Free Radical provides no hints whatsoever. I managed to work out how to proceed after about 5 minutes of getting increasingly peeved off, and I'd imagine it was the same for many others if they succeeded at all. There have been hints that something awful like this might rear its ugly head following earlier lighter puzzles like Atom Smasher's Crane, and I'm glad there aren't too many more like this one, as it is, to be frank, really badly designed. What's much better is the signposting after. Reaching the bridge seen during the opening cinematic, you pull a switch, which in turn opens up a few gates that were previously blocked. As you retrace your steps, enemies appear along the path you need to take, so that you don't end up bumbling around earlier areas which serve no further purpose. It is great design following the ridiculousness of the pillar puzzle. To gain access to the temple, you drop down a hole which leads to its entrance, at which point the music kicks up a gear. Aztec Ruins is the only mission lucky enough to get 2 backing tracks rather than the lone ditty the other 9 get. Along with the more puzzle-focused gameplay, it's another inclusion which makes it quite unique. As much as it may seem like I've buried discussion of this next topic deep in the video where few will likely see it and subsequently complain about it, I can assure you the subject I'm about to talk about only appears where it does because it's a good match for the level's content. There are parts of the game's humour, here and elsewhere, which have not aged altogether brilliantly. I've already spoken about Future Perfect, in my view lacking some of the balance which makes this game's humour so great, and in retrospect there were signs in 2 of what was to come. A British explorer pilfering precious artifacts from a less developed civilization, killing many of them in the process. It's played for laughs here, but it's a bit too close to the bone. The over-sexualisation of female characters in particular, like Miss Wild West Tits McGee here, it's played for laughs, but nowadays it comes off as childish at best. I could highlight plenty of other examples, but I'm not going to, as this section has not been written with the intention of providing an exhaustive list. What I will say is that there are definitely parts of the campaign that are a product of their time and wouldn't make it into titles released in the present. It is not the end of the world and no one need get particularly worried about it, and I'd be surprised to hear of anyone who played TimeSplitters 2 and was appalled, but equally, it's important when examining a medium like video games to acknowledge that times have changed. What will change as you venture deeper into the temple is your method for dealing with golems, as weapons will no longer do the trick. These ones are made out of stone, and so a new strategy must be adopted. Standing on pressure-sensitive plates will open holes in the floor, which the golems thankfully don't tend to spot and will run right into. You also have to do the same thing while dealing with a few monkeys at the same time, and if you're lucky, 1 or 2 of the golems may even accidentally remove themselves from the equation. There are also spear traps to avoid, as well as this puzzle where you have to shoot whichever of the 6 faces on the wall has evil red eyes until all of them have been destroyed. Like the pillars, what you're meant to do is not clear, nor are there any clues provided, but with there being nothing else in the room to interact with, and with TimeSplitters being a first-person shooter, it shouldn't take too long to figure out. Sprinting away from a boulder in true Indiana Jones fashion while cutting through another group of pesky natives, you arrive at Aztec Ruins' last room. The time crystal is within your grasp, but 3 more stone golems stand between you and it. Strangely, a time portal does not appear once it's in your possession like would normally happen. Instead, your only option is to fight the golems, with no holes in the ground to help. There is a grenade launcher nearby you can use, and blowing up the golems is great fun, but good luck spotting it, as it's not exactly obvious it's even there. This sequence is a metaphor for Aztec Ruins as a whole, I think. The mission can be very entertaining when everything comes together, this second half in the temple especially. It's genuinely excellent, but too often, how you're meant to progress isn't as apparent as it perhaps should be. 8 levels have now passed since you first met Cortez and Hart, and for the briefest of moments, you see them again.
Oh.
You made it.
Eagle. What?
These scenes set things up for the game's finale, I suppose, but it feels very disjointed after such a long gap between seeing the characters. If Aztec Ruins is Free Radical's take on Indiana Jones, then 2315's Robot Factory must surely be their attempt at recreating Terminator. The Dark Machinist child is building a robot army to take over the world, and as killing machine Gretel Mark II, you are humanity's last hope. Inside the facility, there are 5 energy nodes which, when destroyed, will halt its production lines, and you then need to retrieve the time crystal and defeat the machinist himself. I want to put my cards on the table up front. This mission is dreadful, it is rancid, it is TimeSplitters 2 at its very worst. Other levels may have a dodgy section here or a second-rate encounter there, but they're usually surrounded by so much quality that forgiving Free Radical for the odd minor transgression isn't a big ask. The entirety of Robot Factory, however, is a whopping great mistake, with lots of different problems combining to make playing it extremely unpleasant. Annoyance number 1 is the sci-fi handgun, which you'll be forced to use frequently due to ammo concerns. When it first appeared in Return to Planet X, it was a fun distraction, as there was usually lots of space making its bouncing bullets tolerable. Do you know where those bouncing bullets aren't fun? In small corridors or teeny tiny rooms where they go all over the place. I don't mind losing health or armour when I'm shot by my enemies, I do mind losing health and armour when I've shot myself. Assuming you make it through Robot Factory's early stages without doing yourself in, you'll reach a control panel which opens up a path to the next area. And as you approach it, proceedings become even more disagreeable. There are mounted turrets which can only be taken down when shot in a very specific place. There are chunky bipedal robots which take a ton of damage. There are turrets on rails above you which constantly move back and forth while firing at you. And there are less armoured robots which sometimes spawn in from nowhere. Fighting 1 or 2 types at a time would be fine, but often you face 3 of them or all of them, and it is brutal. Remember also that aiming isn't all too precise in TimeSplitters 2, which makes trying to quickly deal with the 2 types of turrets while robots shoot you a living hell. Then, once you get across this cavernous expanse of death, more nonsense is introduced in the form of these explosive little rascals which appear in an instant and detonate when they get close to you. For successfully navigating this first gauntlet of despair, you are at least rewarded with the electrode tool, as well as a tussle with the final enemy type you'll meet, a walking turret, as if the stationary ones weren't bad enough. Armed with the electrode tool, you can begin destroying the energy nodes. The only moment of note for a good 10 minutes after this is when you take control of one of the on-rails turrets, an admittedly entertaining opportunity to do some damage from safety. The rest of Robot Factory continues in the same vein, but for considerably longer than it has any right to. If this level were the same length as one of TimeSplitters 2's shorter affairs, around 10 to 15 minutes tops, I'd have less of a problem with it. As it stands, it hangs around like a bad smell for what seems like an age, and at no point does it feel like anything other than an unrelenting test of your patience. If it were a graphical treat, that would be something to alleviate some of the monotony, but it's very bland aesthetically too. Yes, a factory is never going to be the most fancy-pants place ever constructed, but with how much inventiveness there is on display elsewhere, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect a tad more. What a disappointment it is that the game's last proper mission is such a letdown in this regard, as putting Robot Factory to one side, TimeSplitters 2 is visually nigh on flawless, its art style and graphics working in tandem to create a look that is simple but striking. Free Radical's designers managed to maintain its cartoony vibe without going overboard with their texture work, and it makes for an aesthetic that is distinct and beautiful. TimeSplitters Future Perfect is an upgrade on 2 as a raw graphical showcase, but with that extra detail, some of the series' charm is lost too. If you manage to reach Robot Factory's final third without losing the plot, your prize for doing so is perhaps the most unforgiving encounter in the entire campaign. Robots spawn in front of you, behind you, basically everywhere, and many of them are equipped with rocket launchers which will melt you in a second. It would be fine enough if very strong enemies only spawned ahead of you, but when you're constantly surrounded, it is no fun at all. It's another soul-destroying part of this parade of unspeakable nonsense. Surviving by the skin of your teeth, you find the Dark Machinist child. As much as I hate the rest of this mission, Free Radical deserves some kudos for this boss fight, as it is enjoyable. Shooting the weak spot in the middle is all you really have to do, but personally I love shooting a weak spot, and it's a lot better than fighting another human, so you have to take what you can get. The Machinist's gigantic, multi-armed robot thing also looks awesome too, a hulking mass of metal limbs. Once he's dead, as per usual, you need to fetch the time crystal as TimeSplitters go on the offensive and get yourself to the nearby portal pronto. After slaying zombies in cathedrals, fighting aliens in outer space and facing off against a robot army, the endgame nears.
You made it.
Here you go. What? Get the crystals.
Space Station is TimeSplitters 2 at its most basic. Indeed, the first of 4 objectives is to run 10 yards and pick up the time crystals. TimeSplitters and those damn dirty flies, again, they are the worst, are on hand to make life tough, with the best plan of attack being not to attack and instead head on your merry way. In the corridor outside, you use a terminal to set off the self-destruct sequence.
Phase 3. First. Self-destruct sequence in progress.
And I don't know how they managed it, but somehow Free Radical fashioned an even worse time-limited section than that included in Atom Smasher. You have 6 minutes on normal difficulty and 5 minutes on hard to escape the now doomed station, and as you'll soon find out, it is very harsh. It's a great shame, as the campaign is so good up until Robot Factory, a waking nightmare, and again here I find it hard to describe this level as anything other than poor. With the clock ticking down, you ride an elevator to a lower level, and you can choose between corridors on your left and right. If you head left, you'll stumble upon your next objective, which is to shoot down the TimeSplitters' fleet of ships. It's another moment of unfairness. Down the right corridor, there is a spacesuit you really need to grab before you go outside, but you're never told that, and it's easy to miss even if you do go right first. It's quite possible you end up manning the turret without putting the suit on, which will probably result in death without you properly understanding why. The solution is obvious too, only make the right path accessible until the spacesuit is collected, so there's no ambiguity. Including the turret portion at all was not the right decision either, as there's nothing fun about sitting still while a timer counts down, and actually reaching Cortez's ship even with normal's extra minute is demanding. The reward at the end is a closing cinematic of the remaining Space Marine escaping, and while we get there, a few final words regarding TimeSplitters 2's overarching story. It is okay. You have to appreciate the lengths Free Radical went to in ensuring the campaign has narrative cohesion, but at the same time the Cortez and Hart portion of the plot is weak. You see them at the start of the game for about 30 seconds 8 missions later, and then during Space Station. It provides something to be built on during Future Perfect, which does a far better job of merging Cortez's story with the time travelling, but in itself it's of little interest. At long last, with the crystals safe and the space station blown to smithereens, TimeSplitters 2 concludes.
Want some of this?
TimeSplitters 2 is an unfortunate title, as while it's remembered incredibly fondly by a lot of people, myself included, it released at a time when Bungie's phenomenal Halo Combat Evolved was taking the world by storm. Halo is the better game, there's no doubt in my mind, but that doesn't mean TimeSplitters 2 is by any means a bad game. It isn't, it's an absolutely spectacular game, a thrilling mix of the wacky foundations laid by its predecessor and the game design sensibilities Free Radical's team picked up when developing GoldenEye and Perfect Dark for Rare, featuring just a few locations as well thought out as those included in the game's campaign is impressive enough, but to feature 10 distinct levels with their own story, music, characters, weapons and objectives almost beggars belief. To say it doesn't suffer from the odd issue would be untrue, the aiming mechanics being my biggest bugbear. However, the good hugely outweighs the bad. If you're able to get your hands on TimeSplitters 2, you really should endeavour to give it a go. Despite it being 22 years old, I had more fun playing through its campaign recently than I've had with the vast majority of first-person shooters I've played since. Thanks for watching the video, boys, girls and space marines. If you had a tremendous time, do consider liking, subscribing and sharing your memories of TimeSplitters 2, and hopefully we'll meet again soon.